Alrighty, how's it going, everybody? We're gonna talk a little bit about art and the internet and why sometimes it's a bit harder for art to exist on the internet. I've wanted to make a video talking about this subject for like quite a bit of time. I am doing this recording at 3 a.m., so like if my voice is like fucking dead, that is why. I guess to start this idea off, I'm going to talk a little bit about art itself. For a while, I had this belief that like art was a painting or a thing. I think this is like a pretty normal belief, right? That art means a piece of art. Art is the drawing, art is the video, art is the piece of music. And for a while, this is how I thought, but there was a video by a YouTuber that I really respect called CJ the X, who made a video talking about subjectivity in art. And I've mentioned this before on this channel, so I'm just gonna like paraphrase a little bit. Basically, an idea that they posit is that art is not the thing, right? It's not the painting, the video. It's a moment that happens between a person and a thing, right? When we're staring at the painting, it's the process of us interpreting that art piece that creates the art itself. Artistic pieces tend to be objects that leverage our capacity for connection in a way that produces an interesting artistic experience. But that isn't to say that anything can or cannot be art, you know? In that way, anything can be art or like an art piece, but art itself has more to do with a moment that happens between us and a thing, and the game we play when we interact with a thing, rather than just being an art piece itself. Under this presumption, basically if the tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, maybe the tree fell, but we don't get to consider it art. In other words, art isn't the thing, it's a moment. And it's a moment that happens between a subject and an object. And I think this distinction is really important because I think this actually taps deep into the reason as to why art feels like it doesn't really happen on the internet as much. And you know, this is weird because art is constantly being made for the internet. We have a surplus of content out there, so why is it that artistic experiences feel so vast and buried? When you use platforms like Twitter and Instagram, yes, you can find plenty of artists through those platforms, but oftentimes art isn't really appearing on the main page. These social medias operate based on algorithms that are designed to make Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as much money as possible. In the case of YouTube, which I'm much more familiar with as an algorithm, YouTube's goal is to make as much money as possible by putting ads on their videos. In other words, for them to make the most amount of money, they have to keep people on the website as long as possible in order to watch the most amount of ads. And they mainly keep people on the website by using click-through rate and watch time metrics. And so YouTube uses these metrics in order to figure out which videos and thumbnails will get people to click on them the most and watch them for the longest amount of time. And this is where the first kind of issue when it comes to art comes into play, because art isn't necessarily there to keep people on the website. It's there to get people to think and feel something and, you know, like challenge a belief system or something systemic, you know? Art can capture people's attention, but the goal of art isn't purely attention most of the time. In that way, YouTube isn't really incentivized as much to push out art. They're more incentivized to push out videos that will keep people on the website and keep them engaged. And keep in mind that this wasn't really the case like 15, 20 years ago when YouTube started, right? This all happened because YouTube shifted from being a website where people were broadcasting themselves to a website owned by Google designed to make profit. At least from what I understand, I'm not the most knowledgeable on this subject, but like, I feel like YouTube's business strategy for a while was just to get as many people on their website as possible, and then over time they've sort of integrated more and more ways of keeping people on the website as well as targeting them with more and more ads. This is why over the past like 5 years or so, YouTube has continued to spam ads on TV users because now there's more TV users than ever watching YouTube, and they're less likely to skip ads because if they're coming from TV, they're very used to watching ads, you know? Among other reasons, right? It's harder to pick up the channel changer and skip an ad. There's a lot of incentive there for YouTube to just spam minute-long ads on TV users. And the same goes for people in browser and mobile. It feels like ads are being played more and more and more. Clearly, this incentive for profit is really pervasive on YouTube. And really, this is the case for all these websites, right? Under the current circumstances that exist in the world, under the current systems that we live under economically, companies continue to chase the incentive of making more money. And by constantly chasing profit and scaling, these platforms just get worse and worse. And if you're watching this video, you're probably an avid watcher of YouTube. You know this feeling really well, of feeling really like you're being taken advantage of by the algorithm. An eye-catching thumbnail that is covering like drama or a scandal of a big creator, or is just really over the top and hyperbolized content, is gonna perform better than something more subtle and sentimental. And when we use YouTube, like sometimes we can't help but click on those thumbnails that feel like they're taking advantage of our attention in some way. And oftentimes these thumbnails can be on videos that are otherwise very informative or beneficial to us when we actually watch them, but also at the same time, the way these videos are structured now is in a way to keep our attention as much as possible. Oftentimes on YouTube, it feels a lot less like we are actively choosing to watch something, and more like things are being fed to us. It turns us from a person watching videos to a consumer watching videos. It turns us from the subject choosing to watch YouTube to the object who happens to open up their phone at the beginning of every day and open YouTube as soon as they wake up. And if you're a creator on YouTube, you also kind of understand this from the inverse perspective, right? At least in my own experience, I try to make things that are artistically valid and interesting and moving, but I feel like I'm constantly grappling between the two wolves of like, make art piece that is all for the sake of me or something that I want to benefit the world, and engaging thing that will do well in the algorithm. To do that, I have to be mindful of making a thumbnail that is eye-catching, has bright colors, that includes a composition that draws people in and gets them to understand the video concept in a way that is palatable. The video concepts themselves have to be something that's palatable and recognizable and understandable to a general audience. And the video itself has to capture a user's attention in the first 10 seconds and tell them that watching the video that they're currently watching is more worthwhile than looking at any of the other videos in there suggested. And in this dynamic, the inverse is true. We go from artists and curators, and creatives to content creators, producers, and influencers. Not to say that any of those labels are inherently bad, but you see what I mean, where there's suddenly this elephant in the room that needs to be addressed that prevents us from being able to make choices that are totally our own. We go from being the subject to the object that stays on these websites as much as possible in order to make these companies as much money as possible. And this is sort of the core of my argument, right? How can we have artistic experiences and moments between a subject and an object when we ourselves fail to be the subject? If we are being made into an object by these platforms, right, like people who are addicted to social media, who aren't making active choices in the way that they consume, how can we hope to have artistic experiences that depend on us being subjects? The potential for us to have artistic experiences is limited by our capacity to actively choose to watch the thing that we're watching. And I feel like we kind of know this to be true on some level, right? It's not that we aren't having artistic experiences come to us through YouTube. It's that when we go to click on those videos, they tend to be a little bit more abrasive than the other videos that would be more comfortable to watch while we eat dinner, right? It's not just that art isn't appearing on YouTube. There's plenty of art on YouTube. It's that the way that this art is made is designed in a way that limits an artistic experience, and we ourselves aren't as open to having those experiences because of the way that these platforms as a medium have encouraged us to engage with them. The incentive structure for creators is designed in a way to incentivize them to focus on analytics. There's incentive for viewers to continue watching digestible content because YouTube continues to serve that to them. And YouTube has an incentive to serve those digestible videos to users because it keeps them on the platform for longer and allows them to make more money off of ads. Okay, now that I've kind of laid out my argument bare, I want to come in and sort of interject with a little bit more nuance into this discussion. On some level, it doesn't feel like we're always being objectified on the internet, right? Or at least it doesn't feel bad, so why is that? On some level, when you make something very attention-grabbing, it has to compel some part of us in some way to keep us watching, right? I feel like all of our favorite art in the world, on some level, captured our attention in a way that we couldn't control. I feel like in my own experience, some of my favorite music and videos are things that I couldn't help but pay attention to, right? Compelling art can certainly be accessible and attention-grabbing, so what distinction exists there? I think this alludes to the idea that we ourselves aren't solely a subject. On some level, of course, we as people have a capacity to choose, right? We have a capacity to make decisions. And when we actively choose something and pay attention to it, it means that we're able to get more out of that artistic experience than we would have otherwise. But there also is this component of us that can't help but react. And a lot of these mediums will play upon these ideas to begin with. Video as a medium, because it is temporal, is sort of guiding our attention throughout an experience using visuals and audio. And the same is true for music, which uses audio over time to deliver a moving experience for a listener. When it comes to anything temporal, there's kind of an implication of flow state, or the way something moves. And these aspects of engaging with art are more on the end of objective than subjective. Even looking at a picture, like, even though a lot of that process can seem very attentive, there's some photos that will grab our eye more closely. When we talk about things that move us, that implies that we were in one place before and we are now in a different place. And not every component and facet of that experience is wholly consensual within art, right? Sometimes the best art surprises us and catches us off guard. And that can't happen without an art piece doing something for us that we had no control over, but we still liked anyway. At its core, we can pay attention to things, and we have the control to pay our attention, but that doesn't mean that we have complete control over what satisfies our attention, you know? In some ways, I think the best way to say this is that some of the best art out there manages to pay respect to the part of us that we can't control, and is able to enlighten us in a way that helps us to take more control over our lives. And the same is true for, like, friendships, or relationships, or, like, any connection, right? The process of exercising self-love and connection with another involves learning to accept the parts of a friend or a partner that they themselves can't help but be, you know? We're not solely fond of people because of the things that they actively choose to do, right? There's like natural things that they express themselves within that we can't help but be drawn to. And that goes for us too, right? Like, part of self-love is learning to accept the parts of ourselves that we can't help but be. And in the same way that really good art manages to help us take more control over our lives, the best friendships also subjectify us. If we're continuing to make a bad decision in our life, our friends can hopefully be there to accept those parts of ourselves while still trying to offer perspective and help to help us gain more control over those parts of ourselves that continue making mistakes. And when it comes to self-love, right? We can love every part of ourselves that makes mistakes, but if we continue to validate those parts of ourselves, some of those things will hurt others. And so part of maturity is learning to take responsibility over the things that we can't control and learn to manage them better as to not hurt other people or ourselves. Hopefully this kind of dialectics I'm doing is like illustrating the idea of art as a connection, right? A connection between subject and object. In many ways, the act of self-love is kind of an act of art, as you are the subject loving the part of yourself that is the object. Sorry, that was my Bluetooth speaker doing the little beep beep. I forgot to turn it off, that was my bad. But now, after talking for like a fucking hour about all this stuff, that is to say that we can use the connection between relationships and art to illustrate this tension of like art being objectifying and social media being objectifying, but what's the difference between those two things? Because in the same way that art can objectify us and yet it can serve us, relationships also can objectify us and serve us, This is to say that not every beneficial part of a relationship is wholly consensual and wholly two people choosing to want a certain thing. Some of the best art can be surprising, can be shocking, can be attention-grabbing, can be objectifying. And some of the best relationships can be too. I feel like most people watching this video want a partner that likes their body or is like attracted to them. Some of the most beneficial experiences in our lives are ones that are objectifying. If you think about like a really good surprise from a friend, like the best presents are people getting or making you something that feels like they're seeing a part of you. They understand a part of you that you have no control over, and sometimes they understand something about you that you yourself didn't even know. And it's this process of objectification, right? Of doing something outside of the bounds of subjectivity, right? Somebody choosing something that you can actually be subjectified. Art objectifies us by seeing the part of ourselves that we can't help but be, is intimately aware of the parts of ourselves that we ourselves don't even understand, and reveals that to us in a way that we had no idea could have existed before. And it's the revealing of this possibility through objectification that is subjectification. By objectifying us, art is able to subjectify us, because it teaches us something about ourselves, and we're able to make decisions based on that. And that objectification comes from a place of respect, not disrespect. And this is different from the objectification that happens on social media. When you're getting rage baited by a piece of drama slop that you can't help but pay attention to, is that revealing a part of yourself in a way that is respectful to you? No. No. Yes, this process can eventually be something that is subjectifying, right? By us becoming aware of the rage bait, we can learn to resist it. But at no point is this the art revealing to us the rage bait, right? This is the deceptive hand of YouTube serving us a video that we don't want to click on, but we can't help but click on, and serves their bottom line. It doesn't serve us, the viewer. This is objectification. It's not teaching us to resist that part of ourselves. It's attempting to keep us there, and that's disrespectful. That's not respectful objectification. And we can take this further idea of exploitative objectification by applying it to the ways in which us learning to grapple with this thing has affected us all as people. Think about how this objectification has evolved beyond our generation. If we want to see the extent of this objectification and how it's affected us, we can see the evidence of it in our day-to-day life. It's said that our generation, as like Gen Z and like Gen Alpha and Millennial, are more self-aware and like self-conscious. Why is that? If you think about what's happening on YouTube, the part of us that is being taken advantage of is our attention. Our attention is really the part of us that can be subjective. Out of all of the actions that we can choose to do in our lifetime, the core of these decisions revolves around attention. And if attention is the thing within us that's being exploited, we need to like rectify that somehow. A theory that I have is that the reason why we are so self-conscious is because being self-aware is a coping mechanism in a world that is constantly exploiting us. On the internet, we become very aware of the ways that a thing is trying to take advantage of our attention. We are long past the meta of the red arrow in a YouTube thumbnail, of the shocked face in a YouTube thumbnail. These things are tried and true because they work on our attention, but we are now made aware of them because they have become so pervasive within our culture. And so not only do we need to be aware of these things, but we need to be consciously aware of ourselves at all times when the ways in which we might be attending to something is harmful to us. In the age of like performance being something that is given to everybody within a smartphone, we are now made more painfully aware of the ways in which we are being emotionally manipulated, and we are being emotionally manipulative ourselves. It's not just that we're getting angry at a post online. No, we're being rage baited, right? This post is actively being made to manipulate us, to pay attention to that thing and get angry. It's not just that my friend is good looking, okay? He's like actively mogging me in order to farm engagement. Our generation has not only adopted a new set of slang, but a lot of this language is pointing to a self-consciousness that is rooted in how our attention is being taken advantage of online and how we are being emotionally manipulated by the internet. Yeah, it gets us thinking not only about our reaction to things and other people's reaction, but how we can induce virality by creating a reaction, or how we can resist reacting to things and be nonchalant. Even the idea of cringe is like painfully self-aware. Do you see how this is like it's fractalized into our fucking generation? In that way, self-awareness and self-consciousness isn't pervasive as a coincidence. It's pervasive as a direct response to the rise of smartphones. Hello, everybody. This is me in the edit. I just wanted to interject. I've got a bit of a cold, so like my sinuses are a little bit fucked. Sorry about that. While I say here that like this is a direct byproduct of smartphones, and I agree with that assessment, our self-awareness is clearly not just a byproduct of us resisting exploitation online, right? It is a response to us resisting exploitation in general, but as smartphones have risen and social media has risen as well, and these platforms have continued to shape the ways in which we interface socially because of the way that social media frames interaction through a lens of performer and audience, right? Like there's always a new performance that is happening. And again, the very root of this shit has a lot more to do with capitalism, but the technology of social media and the smartphone has just exacerbated the existing exploitation of capitalism and made it a performer thing. And now it has bled into our social interaction, and we are made constantly aware of the ways in which things are a performance in light of dealing with the inner void and shame. Social media gave us the opportunity to fill the void in our hearts with performance, and because the performance is used as a mask for shame, the way it manifests will always change. And this is the reason why social media moves so quickly. It's like, in order to deal with our shame, a performance is created, and then we become self-aware of that performance because it is performative and exploitative in some way. We shine the light at it, it becomes ironic, and then anytime we shine a light on a thing, it creates a new blind spot of shame that emerges in a new performance. And so in order to deal with this exploitation, instead of dealing with the root of our shame, we point the finger at a new performance because new forms of shame are constantly being created. Does that make sense? One moment people are shaming gooners for being weird, then gooners realize they need to perform differently in order to succeed in a social situation, and then their performance is caught upon and performative males become the new target. Does this make sense? I know, every video essay is capitalism bad. All roads lead to the golden arches. Fuck. I think at this point, I've kind of lost the plot, so I'm gonna just wrap this up in a nice little bow and try to conclude it in a way that is a little bit less doomer. The main thing that I feel about social media is that a lot of these problems are gonna continue to get worse. You know, there's already a lot of talk about how like the rise of AI has like affected art. You know, the fact that AI art is in direct competition with other forms of art kind of dilutes the consumption experience of regular art. And I still don't really know how to feel about that, honestly. But what I can say is that I feel like we've already been experiencing the effects of AI on art for well over a decade. With the rise of the YouTube algorithm and algorithmic social platforms, you know, the technologies that these algorithms employ are machine learning. You know, they are AI as we know it. They aren't generative, but when content gets generated for these platforms, the ways in which we interface with that content is very similar to the experience of engaging with generative AI art. The ways in which videos are made are diluted in order to accommodate the ways in which the algorithm promotes videos. Again, YouTube doesn't prioritize quality videos, it doesn't prioritize things that are good, it prioritizes videos that keep people on the platform. Yes, human psychology changes, what people choose to watch and favor changes over time, and new metas emerge, but the artistic changes that occur within content are filtered through the lens of watch time. YouTube as an art medium necessitates for art content to be engaging in order to even be seen by most people, and the addictive habits that these platforms employ create a passivity in the viewer's experience that
exploits them, that makes it harder for them to engage with art in a way for the art to fully hit them. And it's kind of complicated, right? When I talk about all the art that I personally enjoy the most, I found all of it through YouTube. Musicians like Quadeca, artists like Jane Remover, listening to Kendrick Lamar. I found most of these artists through watching YouTube. YouTube is a fantastic resource for pointing us to directions of consuming really meaningful art. And sometimes the recommended algorithm hits us in a way that's so personal that it allows us to open our mind, and in a way that does allow us to tap into the subjective aspects of ourselves and really appreciate these art pieces for what they are. At the same time, though, the metrics for competition mean that some other art that could be really interesting but doesn't speak to me in as immediate of a way ends up getting written off. Even for artists that I do like, that pour their heart into videos, they might make music or an art piece that's deeply personal only for all of the top comments engaging with that piece of art to be full of like meta-ironic humor that it doesn't feel like the art is connecting as much as it used to. And so the reasons as to why engaging with art on these platforms is more difficult has to do with not only the ways that these platforms recommend content, but the ways in which these platforms condition us to socially engage with them and each other. With that in mind, I don't want the takeaway of this video to be entirely negative. Again, the process of objectification isn't inherently bad. Ultimately, it's not a problem if these social medias are objectifying us, if they serve us, or we have an opportunity to opt out. But with many of the ways that YouTube tends to objectify us, it tends to do us more harm than good. And in the case for art, directly contributes to the ways in which it is consumed. But the fact that you're watching this video on YouTube now means that there's something that you can do about it. Hopefully with some of the shit that I've said in this video, you can use some of these takeaways in some ways to create a habit around social media that resists the ways in which it incentivizes you to use it. The way to change these platforms has to do with the ways in which we change the incentive. And if we better understand what we want, it helps us build new habits and ways of engaging with these platforms that can create opportunities for better art and being able to see better art. If you're a YouTube creator yourself who creates art for this platform, you know all too well that making art engaging for YouTube just becomes a new rule to subvert in the context of YouTube in order to deliver a unique experience. If you're a viewer on YouTube, you can change your viewing habits. I personally use an extension called Unhook to remove like recommended videos on my main YouTube account because I've personally been tired of getting recommended shit on the same computer that I use to make things. And so it means that only the search bar on YouTube is accessible to me, as well as my subscriptions. And so I'm either seeing stuff that I'm directly looking for, or content from a subscriptions feed that's a little bit more curated to what I want to watch. And again, this shit isn't perfect, okay? YouTube's search bar is its own fucking can of worms. But again, it's like this little shit that you can do to change the way that you interface with YouTube that can help improve your experience on these platforms. And this is also an opportunity to use YouTube to find art on other platforms, musicians and artists and, you know, game designers and like indie devs and people who make like really cool shit that doesn't solely exist on these platforms. We've largely adopted these platforms out of the universality of them and the fact that they're so convenient. But for a time, I feel like a lot of our experiences of the internet were very local in booting up Newgrounds or cool math games. You know, the ways that we engaged with the internet and art was different 15 years ago, and we still have the options in some ways to go back to those things because they were more subjective and involved us actively searching for interesting things. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. I think I'm good. Thanks for watching this video. Hey, subscribe if you're new. Okay, I'm still not above it, okay? And yeah, take care. Have a good one.